Very good. Great, thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Children and Education Policy and Accountability Committee meeting. I'm Helen Rowbottom. I'm the chair of the meeting and a councillor in Hammersmith and Fulham. And tonight is our annual budget meeting. So we are kindly joined by Councillor Alex Sanderson, who's the Cabinet Member for Children and Education, and also Councillor Rowan Ree, Cabinet Member for Finance and Reform, to talk us through the budget and the kind of decision-making underpinning the budget this year. So before we start, I just have a few housekeeping points. This meeting is being live streamed to the Council's YouTube channel. So by participating in it, those in the room and online, you are consenting to being recorded. If the fire alarm sounds either continuously or intermittently, I will adjourn the meeting, and we have a slightly different exit in a slightly different room tonight. So it will be out, I think, round the back to my right and assembling in Riverside Gardens. And I will shortly go around everyone to just so we all can be introduced to each other. I think we broadly all know each other, but for the benefit of anyone joining online as well. So I will just run through before that. I've had apologies for absence from Councillor Darryl Brown and from Eleanor Allen. Otherwise, I think we've got everyone here in almost full complement tonight. And before we start, I wondered if any members here have any declarations of interest that they'd like to make. Okay, no declarations of interest. So item 3, the minutes. Do members agree the minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of November 2023 as an accurate record? Agreed. Agreed, great, thank you very much. So before we go to Nandini, so sorry, you've got your hand up.
No, I have 2 corrections on page 9 and page 10. If you can hear me.
I can. Yes, go ahead, Nandini. What are your corrections?
I think page 9 on supported internships, the sentence reads a bit wrong. It says support for internships or something like that. I'll have to send the corrections over email. And page 10, I actually tried to ask about, in case of disabilities, I wanted to know if it goes up to 25, but the sentence has been reconstructed a little weirdly. So I think I need to send both over email.
If we got half of that, Nandini, but what I'd suggest is, do you want to send it through to Debbie? If you can maybe put your email in the chat or something, and Nandini, if you send that through, I'll review it before the end of the meeting, if that's okay.
Okay.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Okay, thank you for alerting me to that. Sorry, I've got some screens and wheeling around from left to right, so apologies. Thank you for pointing out Nandini's hand up. So minutes approved, and we will just go round. Perhaps we can even start online, given that I ignored you before, Nandini. We're just going to go around and introduce ourselves to anyone joining the meeting virtually. Do you want to, Nandini, would you like to start?
I mean, if you can hear me, I'm Nandini Ganesh, and I manage Parents Active. I'm really sorry I couldn't be there today. I'm not feeling very well, and I didn't want to pass it on. Hopefully you can hear me.
We can. We're battling with a very, very lovely ongoing beeping in the background and King Street, but we could hear you, and thank you very much. And sorry you're not feeling very well, Nandini. James. Is in the room and joining online. Sorry, that was curious. No, that's we'll wait for your online version as opposed to your your in-person as opposed to your online avatar.
Yeah, because I'm presenting, that's why I'm
of course. So sorry, Tony. Same for you. Let's shoot over to Tony in the IRL version.
Okay. Should I? Okay. So hi everybody. I'm Tony Burton. I'm the head of finance for Children's Services and Education.
James Newman, Assistant Director of Finance.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Jackie McShann, Director of Children's Services.
Evening, Amanda Gordon, Operational Director of Children and Young People Services.
Good evening, everybody. Sarah Bright, Assistant Director, Children's Commissioning.
Good evening, everyone. Nadia Taylor. I started actually my participation in the committee as a elected parent governor representative, but I'm now a co-opted member. Thank you.
Lovely bio from you, Nadia. Everyone knows me.
Yes, I'm Mercy Ume, one of the councillors for Shepherd's Bush Greenwood.
Good evening, I'm Councillor Ali Afzal Khan. I'm the opposition member on the Children and Education Services PAC. Thank you.
Thank you. And I've introduced councillors over here who will hand to, in fact, nice segue straight to item 4, which is the 2024 medium-term financial strategy. So I will hand over to Councillor Rowan to give the overview.
Thank you very much, Chair. Councillor Rowan Ree, Cabinet Member for Finance and Reform. Delighted to be making my annual trip to the committee to discuss the budget. Just as a bit of a headline, this is obviously a pretty difficult time to be setting budgets in local government. I think everybody knows about some of the financial constraints on councils across the country. Despite these, we've managed to put together a budget that not only safeguards some of the key services that councils deliver, but also protects some of those services that make Hammersmith and Fulham unique. Things like providing free breakfasts for primary school children, things like providing free home care, things like the local law enforcement teams. We've only been able to do this because of our ruthless financial efficiency approach to managing public services and through carrying out a number of reforms in various areas. I'll go through all of these points in turn briefly just before we kick off and hear the presentations. So before we start, I just wanted to thank not only the finance officers who've done an excellent job in making sure that all our figures add up and that the budget's balance. They worked incredibly hard, not just over the last few months, but over the course of the whole year in order to put this budget together. I wanted to thank all of the officers in the various departments as well, who've done a great job in terms of finding savings and managing previous year's budgets effectively, so that we're in the position that we are in today. And I'd like to thank my cabinet colleagues as well, like Councillor Sanderson, who've done an excellent job in terms of marshalling the savings and the efficient running of budgets across the whole of the council. Now, as I mentioned, this is a difficult time for local authorities. Anyone who's opened a newspaper or turned on the radio will have heard all sorts of horror stories about councils around the country, whether it's Woking or Birmingham issuing Section 114 notices, effectively saying that they are no longer able to meet their financial obligations. And in fact, things are going to get worse before they get better. It's been reported that 1 in 5 local authorities now are at the point where they think they may have to issue a Section 114 notice this year. For any residents watching, for the councillors here, for the officers here, I just wanted to offer reassurance that in Hammersmith and Fulham, we're not in this sort of dire financial situation. Last year, we managed to run a budget surplus. We underspent against the budget that we'd set and managed to add money into our reserves at a time when most councils are taking money out. In fact, we had the auditor come to a meeting a couple of months ago, and he said that we're one of the best run councils in London. So I want to reassure anyone who is at home watching, who relies on council services or who relies on the council in some way. This is a well-run council, and we are managing our services and our budgets effectively. But we started from a difficult position here in Hammersmith and Fulham. Since 2010, our grant funding from central government has been cut by 56% in real terms. We started this year with a budget gap of £25 million. That means before spending a single penny on new services and investment, we had to find £25 million of savings, something I'm pleased to say we've been able to do. Despite this, we've put together a balanced budget this year. As I say, we've managed to secure investment in the services, not just our statutory services, but the services that make Hammersmith and Fulham unique. Things like free breakfasts, things like the free home care, things like the law enforcement teams. These are services that residents rely on. These are services that residents value, and as a council, we value them as well. And that's why we've made a point of protecting them. Now, this is only possible because we take a ruthlessly financially efficient approach to all spending across the council. And we are constantly reforming. The 3 reforms I'd like to talk about briefly this evening: reforms through technology, through our organisational changes, and also policy reforms that we are funding through this year's budget. Briefly, through our use of technology, I think we're at the forefront of adapting the most recent technology in local government. We're using artificial intelligence in our adult social care department. We're using robotics in our revenue and benefits team. All these changes mean that the services are run efficiently, effectively, and provides the best outcomes for our residents. In terms of organisational changes, we are looking at 4 large cross-council programmes to make sure that we save money this year. We're going to be launching reviews into how we use property, commercialisation of services, the way that our staff are organised across the council, and also how we manage the data that we hold. And finally, through this budget, we're funding a number of new policy reforms. I think most notably, and perhaps the one that will be most of interest to this committee, is through our family hubs investment, something that I'm very proud of, something that's going to take services out of the town hall into the communities, to the people who really use them and really value them. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. I'm looking forward to answering your questions, but I'm sure you'll want to hear about the budget in a bit more detail from James, from Tony, and from Councillor Sanson. Thank you very much.
Great. Over to you, James.
Thank you, Councillor Ree. So this is going to be the first of 2 presentations this evening, which I'm just going to get up. So just give me a sec just to get this on the screen. And what I'm going to do here is just go through, give you the corporate overview of the budget, which Councillor Rowbottom heard at the pod last week as well. So this will be soon quite familiar, I'd imagine. And then Tony will provide the service position as well after that. So we're going to cover in these slides on the corporate overview of our budget. We're going to go through outlining our strategic operating environment. We're going to talk about objectives of our financial plans and delivery strategy, the proposed budget for 24-25, and over the medium term, the forward look. So obviously we close this budget, but then it's straight onto 25-26 and the forward look from there. So in terms of our strategic operating environment, we continue to work in an era of quite serious economic turbulence. So clearly we were in a period of very low inflation, low interest rates for a long time, up to the war in Ukraine in around about January 2020, February 2022. And since then, both inflation and interest rates have gone rampant, with interest rates currently around about 5.25%, the Bank of England base rate being around 5.25%. This has obviously placed considerable pressure on household budgets, creating more unemployment and a fall in real incomes. So it's a tricky time for residents within the borough. On top of that, the local government sector is seeing new legislative burdens, such as the Environment Act and the Social Regulation Act. And with the failure of a number of councils, we're also seeing greater regulation. So entities such as Oflog being created to actually look at local government in more detail and actually scrutinise what we do and how we do it. There's also further scrutiny from things like CQC, which looks at our social care and provision in the borough, and also that the Ombudsman, which we're seeing quite seriously in relation to housing. There remains also uncertainty in reforms of local government funding. So 24-25 was the second of a 2-year funding framework. It's important to note that we don't actually know the framework for 25-26 at the moment, and clearly we're coming into a period of political uncertainty with a general election coming at some point soon. It's also the case that the local government, the fair funding review, so how local government gets its funding through government, has been in hiatus for a long time, and so we still don't have a certain funding framework for the medium or long term, and we continue to have 1-year settlements, which makes planning beyond 12 months very difficult indeed. There's also social care reform, which has been kicked into the long grass. So there are a number of different areas where the certainty of our funding and how we receive our financing is difficult. More locally, we also have a number of major regeneration projects that need to be completed, notably the Civic Campus, Hammersmith Bridge, and housing developments such as Hartop and Lannoy. So in terms of the overarching objectives of our financial plans, obviously the critical one is protecting our statutory services and actually keeping vulnerable residents safe across things like children's social care, adult social care, and housing. We want to deliver those services that are valued by our residents, by our businesses, and by our visitors. We want to ensure the safety of our residents, our businesses, and visitors, things like the LEP team. We want to promote the prosperity of the borough, which we are doing through things such as the industrial strategy. And we also want to be an agile, modern and innovative council and actually push forward in terms of things like technological advancement. But we also want to maintain fundamentally strong financial governance and resilience. It is a legal requirement that a local authority provides a balanced budget each year. And so that is one of the key critical measures by which I would say local government, local authorities are actually measured and actually demonstrate their financial resilience. So in terms of the strategy to deliver our financial plans, we've delivered efficiencies of 118 million since 2014-15. We've generated around about 100 million of SIL and Section 106 resources in the borough that helps to actually support our revenue and capital budgets. We secure resources through national programmes. We're very collaborative working across the public sector. We use quite considerably modern IT systems. And we also are working towards maximising new technologies such as AI, analytics and automation. So in terms of our proposed budget strategy for 24-25, the key principles include the following. We are budgeting pay at 3% and price inflation at 5%. This is really kind of looking at the Bank of England projections and the Office of Budget Fiscal Responsibility as well. So looking at kind of their modelling for the next year and looking beyond that, and obviously what we're hoping and what we're expecting is to start to see inflation come a curve back down, and that really is reflected in those pay and price budgets, which are lower than perhaps we've had in 23-24. There's also sizable investment for the delivery of council priorities, which we'll come on to in a second. And within the proposals, we are proposing that council tax is set at a 4.99% increase, which is the maximum beyond which a council referendum has to happen. And I can tell you that more or less every borough in London is looking at a similar increase. We're also factoring in the National Revenue Grant Settlement, so that's a local government funding settlement, which was announced in late December. We're looking at within our tax base in terms of our council tax modelling, an anticipated growth in properties of around about, I think, 750 bandy equivalent properties. We're looking at maintaining resilience through retaining our contingencies, and we're also budgeting within our revenue budgets the cost of capital, so the cost of borrowing and the cost of minimum revenue provision, which is the local government equivalent of depreciation, which hits our revenue budgets. So within council tax, it's obviously notable that Hammersmith and Fulham has one of the lowest nationally, with a bandy equivalent of 871 in 23-24. What we're seeing in terms of what a 1% change equates to, therefore, about £8.70 in terms of per annum per household. We have around 93,000 dwellings in the borough, of which 4% are exempt, so things like students, care leavers and vacant properties. Around about 11% will be fully protected through the council tax support scheme. Around about a quarter will receive a single person discount of around about 25% from the total charge, and that leaves around about 58% who will be expected to pay in full. As I've mentioned, the 4.99% for 2024-25, but national government assumptions are that we will be permitted to increase council tax by 5% each year up until 27-28. So just to give a broad overarching summary of our revenue budget for 24-25, we obviously started the year with the balanced budget for 23-24. The pay and price inflation, which I talked about earlier, so the 3% and the 5%, that amounts to an increase in budget requirement of 13.7%. We're putting a further investment of services of 10.7%, and then we're subtracting from that service efficiencies and savings of 8.1 million, sorry. And then we're looking at other corporate changes such as borrowing costs, interest and concessionary fares, which we're looking at taking off the budget of 12.3 million. And that leaves a council tax requirement, which is the 4.99% of 4 million. And that gets us to a balanced budget, basically. So that's how those are the key constituent parts of how we've actually balanced the budget. In terms of the savings proposals by service, and we'll come on to some of these in more detail in a second, in terms of the children's services, that just gives you a sense of that 8.1 million, which was in the previous slide. So 2.1 million of adult social care changes, including improved commission and use of alternative funding streams. Children's services, which we'll come on to in more detail, of 1.6 million. Savings within environment, economy and finance and corporate services make up the rest. In terms of growth, these are the major allocations. So We wanted to fund our home care provision for adult social care within the borough, and that was given 4.2 million. But we've also got things like the funding of transitions, so the transitions of children to adults in social care, also children's school transport, which again we'll come on to, family hubs, as Councillor Ree's already mentioned, and other smaller things such as cyber security, waste services and major projects. So in terms of our reserve summary, each year the Director of Finance needs to do what's known as the Section 25 statement to talk about the adequacy of our reserves. And it's fair to say that I think our reserves are adequate. We're talking about general fund reserves and balances, which would reduce to 91 million by 27-28, which is still considerable, and particularly within a London context as well. So our reserves are I would say we're in a good place. We're within the recommended range for our minimum general fund balance, being between 19 and 25 million. We're not using any general reserves to fund our 24-25 budget. So whereas some boroughs will be using general reserves to actually to meet budget gaps, we're not doing that. We have a few small targeted earmarked reserves being applied though, which is perfectly legitimate and acceptable. In terms of the medium to forward look from 24-25, it remains a challenging environment for the reasons I've set out. So inflation being somewhat unpredictable, the funding framework being difficult, and obviously a potential general election, which could change things. We are looking at increasing national regulation and inspections, continuing local demographic pressures across the four key demand-led pressures, so adult social care, children's social care, SEND, and temporary accommodation, which pressures for which we're seeing coming through in our current financial year. We've got a forecast budget gap of 10 million a year per annum over the next 3 years, but I expect that to increase just to reflect those issues and the demographic pressures. So although that says that at the moment, I think when we come back to political cabinet with our first kind of estimates for 25-26, I expect that number to be higher for 25-26. So that will once we've refreshed. In terms of next steps for our budget, we did the Policy and Oversight Board last week. We're doing the 6 PAC committees this week and next. That then follows Cabinet on the 12th of February with full council on the 28th of February, which is the one where the full budget gets ratified and confirmed and approved. And that brings to the end my presentation.
Great, thank you, James. Tony, Jackie, am I moving to you next or?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to put the slides on the screen.
Thank you. We didn't know whether you wanted to take questions.
Good point. Does anyone have anything immediate, or would it be better to have a full overview? And then, yeah, I feel full overview as well. Thank you, though. Thank you.
Just sharing the slides.
Thanks very much. We're not going to go through this presentation slide by slide because it very much summarises what's in the PAC, and I'm really proud to present the Director's narrative, and I hope everybody has read it because it speaks very much to the ambition, the aspiration for children and young people in Hammersmith and Fulham, sets out some of our challenges, but really very proudly evidences the work that we have done, not just to deliver our 298 statutory responsibilities, but actually to go over and beyond that to make sure that every child in Hammersmith Fulham is, as I've said here, feels cherished, nourished, belongs, and is supported to reach their potential. This is our vision. We refreshed it in 2023, and it's very much our lodestone. It's what guides us in everything we do. And while we are incredibly ambitious and aspirational, we do take account absolutely of fiscal prudence and being conscious that of the public purse and our responsibility to keep everything we do under review, so that actually we do have the ability to deploy the resources that we're given in a way that benefits children and young people. I think we'll move on. Thank you. So we have a very clear vision and a very clear strategy. And as children's, we work together with that shared set of values and collective endeavour. And our strategy is, as I said, to make sure that every child benefits as early as possible in their lives, and that our provision is local, it's responsive, it meets their needs. and that it reflects the views of children and young people and about what they want, their parents, carers and families, and that it delivers excellent outcomes for every single child, regardless of need, circumstances. So part of that strategy is about being very clear, as I said before, about our financial management. It's also about how we deploy our resources, how we structure ourselves, how we review our staffing, our skill set, and that we keep those under a process of a continual review. And we are always looking to understand what need is, what emerging need is, and how we can work in a more coherent way to meet those. So, for example, we have very clear strategies around our early intervention strategy, and that forms the basis of almost everything we do, so that children are supported at the most optimal level in their lives. We have a youth crime prevention strategy. We have very much a placement strategy, which helps us to deliver local high-quality placements, whether for children requiring foster care or semi-independent or residential care, and that's a slightly different matter. We are continually reviewing those. But the important thing here is, and one of the things that will come through the presentation, is that we are working all the time in conjunction with our partners. And I've talked about parents and carers, but we work with the third sector, community sector. We work with our colleagues in the statutory sector, in our schools, health, and with police colleagues. And one of the themes that I think is very different this year is the way that we are shaping the system-wide approach, and that we are very much shaping a place response. And I think that that's sort of a key new feature. And we've got a number of different forums so that we can have those continual conversations. And that will be evident, for example, in our SEND strategy. So again, fiscally, we have made sure that we, as I said, reviewed services, that we are agile. We've looked at spans and layers of management responsibility. We are actually small, proportionate to our workforce. I manage a big workforce of over 400 people, but actually the children's leadership team proportionately is very small, because we want to ensure that the investment is in those people closest to our work. We're very proud of our workforce. We value our workforce enormously. And without them, we wouldn't be able to deliver all the successes that hopefully you've read about in the presentation. It is a difficult environment. The cost of living makes it difficult for young people to live and work in London. And we have a relatively inexperienced workforce. Morale is high. But nonetheless, we are having to make sure that we keep Hammersmith and Fulham as a destination for our very, very highly valued practitioners. I think we'll move on. So I think James and Councillor Ree have described the challenges. We mitigate those through having, I've said, our very clear strategies, by ensuring that we can maximise our income, grants opportunities through our commissioning team, which is a transformation reform team, really. We've been able to secure over 4 million of additional grant funding. And through our finance team and our education team, we have been able to secure 19 million of safety valve funding. And none of that happens easily. All of that takes a lot of work, but it also is a measure of confidence in the direction and the strategy that we are deploying, because we need to prove that that it's going to be purposeful and it's going to achieve outcomes. In addition to the particular economic challenges that have been described, we are seeing significant pressures in our schools with falling rolls. That's a feature, particularly in London. It's national, but particularly in London. And our schools are also experiencing some real term deficits and reductions in their budget, allied to a long post-COVID tail. So we're seeing a very sustained impact on children and young people as a result of COVID. And people will be familiar with issues around attendance, both at primary and at secondary levels. Our schools are fantastic partners. They work incredibly hard in tandem with us to help us understand and address needs. And again, some of the work that we're doing, well, a lot of the work we're doing is very much about partnership approach. And we've moved away. So within children's, we've moved away from a silo where children's social care and SEND and education and commissioning operated very separately. Similarly, we've taken that approach into our sort of partnerships and community conversations. In the children's social care market, we've got significant challenges. Again, you'll be familiar with this through some of the sort of media publicity about the lack of placements. There's increased regulation. There's also a number of companies that have monopolies on some of the providers, and there is quite a lot of sort of challenges to us to match that funding. Equally, we are seeing increased complexity of needs, which demands are certainly driving higher cost placements. So our strategy, again, as I said earlier, is to find local quality placements. Thank you. So our priorities, these are on top of our core priorities, which is to safeguard and protect children, to ensure that they have a good quality of education, and that we are good corporate parents to our cared for children and our care experienced young people. Equally, that for those young people who are involved in the criminal justice system, that we are effective in helping them divert from this youth justice. So what I've set out here are really over and above what our statutory responsibilities are. And there's some really exciting work here. We've seen about the councils adopt care leaving as a protected characteristic, and only last week have agreed to exempt care experienced young people from council tax. Similarly with our foster carers and our carers with special guardianship orders, which is absolutely fantastic, and it sets a really brilliant precedent for us. And some of you will be involved in the work with our care experienced young people will know that Amena and her team have opened a fantastic Hope, Unity and Belonging Centre. We've also been working with our placement providers to refurbish and regenerate local placements for children in semi-independence living. Very excitingly, and I'm sure we'll talk about, is our family hubs, and Councillor referred to, that's a step change in how services are delivered, not just from children, but across the council. We've worked very hard to develop and socialise our SEND strategy. We've brought a number of strategic documents through various governance, setting out how we want to support children and young people with special educational needs to be at school, to do well at school, to have their needs attended to, and that involves then looking at not just the offer that they get from school and from specialist services, but equally we're developing sort of a new capital programme to look at how we enhance that ability of schools to support children and young people. I talked about attendance, and that's a key challenge for us. And we have an attendance alliance, and like everything, that is very much done again, working with children and young people services and our schools and our education service. So there's a lot there. I won't go through every detail, and we'll move on to our savings and growth details. And I'm going to hand over to Tony for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie. So we have some savings items to talk through with you, and then we have some further growth investment into priority services for the year ahead, 24-25. So the first item really in terms of savings is around our income generation around placements. So in terms of our placements for young people who are looked after, and our care leavers. We can work with our partners to ensure that we receive appropriate contributions to those care packages. So, for example, our NHS colleagues, where those care packages meet health needs, we can secure funding and contributions to the overall care package for those young people in care and in post-care. We're reforming some of the work we do around the high quality support packages that we provide, and we're looking at capitalising on external funding opportunities in order to invest in creating our own provision. So that £100,000 target there is on non-placement spend, where we're looking at supporting our young people around their care packages in a high quality but optimal way. In terms of post-19 housing pathways, what we're able to look at is secure and meet our needs of our young people by working with our housing colleagues, supporting them in their housing needs, and appropriate levels of support using increased floating support to aid their transition post-care and into adulthood and independence. We have been over a number of years looking at our early intervention offer, our commission services across our children's centres, our youth services, and that modest saving there of 137,000 effectively is the full-year effect of some recommissioning activity that we undertook in the current year. So we achieved some savings for the 23-24 budget, and these are additional savings accruing into the new year from that recommissioning work. Lastly, we've got some work around embedding our long-term holiday food provision within the context of our wider food offer, for which there's been significant investment from the council, and also a grant funding around activities such as holiday activities for young people during the school holidays. And we're going to be looking at aligning our food offer across all of those different offers to ensure that that holiday food offer is procured as effectively as possible and sustainable into the long term. I'm just going to carry on to our growth items. So the travel care and support, we mentioned in the previous presentation that home to school transport, that is in relation in this budget sense to the special educational needs cohort. So that's ensuring that our young people in the borough with special educational needs are able to access the education provision and have appropriate transport and support in place to get them there. Our current budget in the current year is just under £5 million, and this investment to secure the appropriate support for our young people going into next year, together with inflation on those transport contracts, will move the budget, annual budget, to about 6.5 million a year. So that's 6.5 million spent on that key support to ensure travel care and support for young people with special educational needs. Also, we've mentioned the family hubs, so further investment that adds to investment in the 23-24 budget for family hubs, bringing those two north and south hubs for the family hubs model into being. A significant investment, but that investment is complemented by aligning our current services with that new family hubs model to ensure that the biggest impact can be achieved with the smallest amount of investment there, but significant investment over 2 years nonetheless.
Great. Did anyone else have any final reflections or things to add from the presenter panel, as it were, before I go to questions? Councillor Sanderson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for all the presentations. I think it's really easy to hear all of this and think, oh, this all sounds great, isn't that amazing? But I think it's really important to think about that broader national context. We've got councils running out of money left, right and centre. And in that context, it is amazing that we are not just continuing with the exceptional business as usual, which is what you would expect from a children's education department, which is very, very good and strives for excellence all the time in delivering its 300 statutory duties. but really, really take pride. And Jackie said proud, she feels proud, and that is the word. I think we can really feel proud of having a department which at every step goes, yeah, we have massive complexity of need. Yeah, we've got really reduced budgets, but how do we make sure that every single young person across Hammersmith and Fulham gets the right support at the right time, at the right level, so they can thrive and have the best possible life? We are such an important department, because if we get it right, it means that those young people for the rest of their lives will have had the very, very best start. And that is something that I feel so confident and so proud of the team for managing every single day. There are real pressures. We've heard some of them there, and it's certainly not easy, but the team work tirelessly, think really entrepreneurially, creatively, but also really realistically about what they can achieve. And I think that's what we've really heard this evening. We're really lucky with our partners. I think we've been able to achieve a huge amount with them. And through our work with them, we've been able to really drive change, not just here, not just across London, but across the country, whether that's looking at our Care Leavers Compact, pushing for reforms in one of my favourite pet subjects, elective home education, and establishing our groundbreaking industrial strategy, which is, again, thinking about how we make sure our young people get the jobs of the future and are equipped to succeed right here in Hammersmith and Fulham. So I'm really, really proud of this team and looking forward to hearing the questions, because I think there has been, in the face of real adversity, total brilliance from this team in setting a balanced budget and delivering exceptional services across the board.
Brilliant, thank you. I will add that, you know, last year I was sitting here and saying congratulations on a balanced budget again, which is a hard enough technical task in and of itself, with the lateness of the hour and receiving the budget and all of the other, you know, cumulative austerity cuts, unexpected inflation, all of the things that were thrown at you. But I would completely agree, and you've summarised it so well, I don't need to sort of re-summarise about managing to find headspace for holding yourself to very high account. I'm sure, I have no doubt, you're regarded as standard bearers, and particularly things you're doing around looked after children and care leavers that I've seen recently has been exceptional. And actually, perhaps worth reflecting, Councillor Sanders and I were at a foster event in Kensington in December, and there was a young couple there who really wanted to, and were in the process of, I think, fostering under this council, and have been drawn to kind of be here as opposed to any other local authority because of the reputation that you have here of being of running such excellent services. So that's, for me, that's a litmus test. Couldn't experience it in a more validating way than that. So I will pause and turn to my left and right and screen and see if anyone wants to ask the first question.
Sorry, I'm not asking a question. You just to follow up what to say thank you to Councillor Rowan and the team for a well-balanced budget again this year, despite the financial struggle and challenges every borough, the whole country is having, and to be able to produce this, I think is wonderful. Just to say thank you to that if I ask my question. Okay, I know you have talked about the family hub. So what's the future of family hub in, you know, do we still have finance into, you know, in continuation of that into next year or something like that?
Yes, thank you. So family hubs are more than just a building. It's a way of working, and we are colleagues in education and SEND and commission colleagues, and Sarah will join me in a moment talking about it, have been working really hard with our community, our parent care community, with our third sector organisations, with health colleagues. In fact, the co-production is so extensive, I couldn't probably cover it all. It's been led by Young Hammersmith and Fulham Foundation, with Action on Disability and Parents Active. Nandini, giving you a big shout out here. And to say it's very extensive. So our vision is to open one specialist hub imminently, which will be the Stephen Wilshire Centre, but enhanced with additional service offer, and to open in the course of this year a hub in the north of the borough and the south of the borough. And we are working, as I said, with partners to co-design what that offer is, And there've been a number of working groups. There've been lots of work streams, including digital work streams, making sure that the communication is out there. But it won't be a case of just opening something and saying that's it. It's going to be something that evolves and changes. So actually we're at the start of a journey, and I'm taking credit for all the work I'm afraid that other people have done. So I am going to hand over to Sarah because actually she and her team have worked so hard with other colleagues.
Yeah, just to follow up really, it is a really exciting programme. It's a truly cross-council and partnership with external partners initiative. Essentially, it's about co-location and bringing together our services all under one roof, but not, as Jackie said, stuck within those four walls. It's about how they work together, connect, support families in an innovative way, harness the resources of the community and work beyond those walls to really support children and families effectively. You know, there should be no wrong door. Families should be able to feel welcomed and be able to access all the support that they need without having to go to multiple places to get the support that they need. It will be in evolution. We have some key partners that we are working with right now to kick us off, but it should be responding to that community need and what residents, children and families are telling us that they need. There will be some core partners as part of that kind of under the one roof arrangement, but they will be working in partnership with a whole host of different organisations and community partners. So we hope to have a real wealth of experience and support available to our children and families. We will be introducing the role of the family navigator to help families navigate their way through our complex pathways and systems. We know it is not easy and we've been told that. So we're really trying to listen and think about how we can redesign and make those services far more accessible so that they don't have to try and contact multiple people multiple times and try and get the services that they need. So yeah, we're at the start of a journey and it will continue and we're really excited.
Thank you very much. Nandini, you had your hand up next. You're muted still.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, Nandini, and I am going to use every sort of a bit of my audible capacity to try and catch what you're saying. So go for it.
I'd like to, I'd like to understand the importance of, the impact of safety valve arrangements. So can you just elaborate on the safety valve arrangement around SEND? Because as I understand, the arrangement goes on till 2025, 26. So is the safety valve arrangement helping to impact the budget favorably? Did you get it?
Hi, Nandini. I think I can try and answer your question. Effectively, the items of investment in our budget, like travel care and support for special educational needs transport, that's from our general fund budget, so our council tax budget. So actually, the high needs block of the dedicated schools grant and the safety valve doesn't really impact on that. That's a statutory responsibility of the local authority for the sort of council tax element of the budget. But certainly the safety valve, I think Jackie said we've had 19 million to date. By the end of next year, Nandini, we expect to have had the full 20.5 million. And really what that safety valve funding is doing is repaying the deficit that had built up on the education budget some years ago. What we have now, Nandini, is an in-year balanced budget on the education budget, and the safety valve money is effectively reducing the historic deficit to nil over that period of the safety valve. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
Thanks, Nandini. Nadia.
Thank you. There's actually three areas I wanted to pose my questions around. The first one, it's obviously very encouraging to hear that where others have failed, we've been very efficient, and that ruthless financial efficiency that you mentioned earlier, it's quite admirable. But I can't help but worry that what it really means is that either there was gross overspend prior to those efficiency made, or that the impact of the savings will actually take time to be felt. So I wanted to sort of ask whether some of those savings have been made from restructure and from sort of workforce savings, or whether it's actually on services. And if the latter, if more the latter, then how is the new sort of revised service provision going to sort of mitigate and ensure sort of continuously good service provision sort of all around? That's the one area. Also, as a resident, I've always been very sort of proud that Hammersmith and Fulham had for quite so many years a freeze on the council tax. Obviously no longer the case, but I just wondered whether having a proposed increase of 5% essentially until 2028 is, how is that going to sort of tally with the cost of living and, the rising inflation and, the struggles that we all actually as residents feeling, irrespective of whether we're working or not. And the third area, I appreciate I'm wearing a different hat this evening, but I'm actually a chair of Carers Network, which supports unpaid carers in Hammersmith and Fulham, as well as Westminster and Kensington and Chelsea. And what I wanted to ask is that there are a number of, we have consistent feedback that there are many households in the borough where there are young children involved, as well as very intensive caring responsibilities those households have. And very often there's only one parent that actually is in employment. Will you be able to extend the exemption from council tax for households like that? And if so, how are you going to sort of inform the stakeholders, as it were, of that? Because I know that a lot of unpaid carers, what I'm trying to say is that there are households where there's two severely disabled people, there's sort of mixture of generations within the household that, is being looked after by parents. So there's grandparents being looked after by parents, as well as obviously looking after young families. So those are the kind of households I'm referring to. Thank you.
Okay, so if I could take the first two of those, perhaps around efficiencies and council tax levels. So firstly, in terms of efficiencies, as James mentioned in his presentation, we've managed to cut out £118 million of spending without affecting frontline services. Okay, so we aren't currently not providing a service that we used to provide. And in fact, not only that, but we've actually gone further. We're providing new services that we weren't providing before. Things like the free breakfasts, things like the holiday food provision, things like the free home care charges that I mentioned earlier, things like the law enforcement teams. So no, the way that we plan these budgets is to look at least 4 years in advance. Okay, so when we're looking at how to fund services, it's not a case of hollowing them out so that we can get a budget through in 1 year, but then perhaps leave ourselves at a shortfall in the following years. The fact we are planning for the medium term at all times means that we are looking ahead and making sure that actually these savings are sustainable and they are going to result in these services being able to carry on into the future. In terms of council tax, I think we've got a pretty good record in the last 5 years. We've managed to cut or freeze council tax 5 times. So that's pretty unusual in terms of most councils. In fact, council tax is 22% lower in real terms than it was when we came to power in 2014. In terms of protecting people through the cost of living, we have I think perhaps the most progressive council tax support scheme in the country. So we briefly touched on this as part of the presentations earlier, but 42% of residents in the borough don't pay the full council tax amount. As low as that is, the third lowest in the country, but 42% of people don't pay that. 11% pay nothing at all. This is to try and make sure that those least able to pay the least. Right. So I think we've built that fairness into council tax isn't a great tax, it's pretty regressive tax, but we've tried to bake some sort of element of fairness into that. So that's something that is a real priority for us. It's something that costs us an awful lot of money, but it's something we think is worth doing because of that fairness argument.
Council tax. Has there been a sort of a rebanding of the properties? Because I mean, I hear that obviously it's quite a hefty percentage, you know, 42, did you say, that aren't exempt effectively. But obviously as a resident, I know, you know, how much my household pays, and it's quite, it's kind of looking at the changes. It does beg the question whether there has been a sort of rebanding and whether errors occur in that in a similar way. I mean, it's not obviously relevant for this evening, but I will say it, there are households. I mean, I live in Vernon Street. I declare that. Maybe I shouldn't say it, but it's a tiny street quite far from the river. Half of the street is practically uninsurable in terms of domestic property because apparently we're a flood alert. Whereas, you know, I have actually family members living in barns literally on the river, no problem at all. So it kind of begs the question that there are somehow information which either councils provide or that is accessible to insurers. There are errors somewhere. So I wonder whether that will have an impact on the banding of the properties and hence the council tax levels.
Okay, yeah. So no, there's not been a rebanding. In fact, there hasn't been a rebanding since I think 1992 when the council tax was brought in. That's why one of the reasons why this is such an anachronistic tax. You know, it's based on property values that are almost as old as I am, just to put it into context. And the bands themselves are not particularly fair. You know, a band H property is supposedly worth at least 8 times as much as a band A property, but it only pays 3 times as much in terms of council tax. Sadly, the sort of overall banding isn't something that the council is able to address. We set the levels within the national framework, but we don't have a say, I'm afraid, over the valuations or how properties are distributed within those.
Could I just add on the 4.99% to 27.28? That's the government set flexibility. It doesn't mean to say we're going to take that. So we make the decision on council tax year by year. As I mentioned, I think every London borough is increasing, maybe by pretty much every London borough is increasing by 5% because of the inflationary pressures that we've seen. So and just the fact that funding is the demand-led pressures coming through. So it's a very difficult decision, but it's one that we regrettably have to take out points.
I'll just maybe add to that by saying it's an anachronistic tax, it's a strange tax, and yet the people who often most benefit from the services that we provide with it are often correlated with, exactly as you pointed out, Nadia, those who, so it's never easy. It's never easy decisions made, and of course we have kind of exemptions for most vulnerable plus wraparound support, but it is you know, we're right at the end, everything crossed, if I might be so party political to say that. I hope we have changes coming, but for the moment it really is down to the bone. Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to thank all the officers for the hard work they've done to balance the budget and present it so nicely to us. I have one question regarding the investment and growth proposal for the travel care and support system. So do we have any data that backs the increase in demand over the last few years that justifies this plan to invest? Because I see there's a huge chunk that is going just to the travel care and support. And I'm wondering if we have data to back that increase in demand. And my second question is that with regard to council tax, the council tax support scheme is crucial for the vulnerable. We understand that, but it also just decreases our tax base. And then when you increase the council tax, then there's a percentage of people who will be bearing the burden of the increase. So can you explain that reasoning a little bit to me? So if you can answer the question on the travel care and support scheme first. Thank you.
Jackie.
Councillor, I'm happy to answer the question on travel care. So costs have increased in the region of about 19%, of which 10% is related to inflationary impact. But we've had a 68% increase in the growth of destinations where children travel to since 2018, 2019. So and we've seen an increase in the growth of the number of children who are being supported in that 5-year period, a growth of about 58%. So we had 322 students supported in 18-19, and in this year we have 511. We had 75 destinations 5 years ago. We've now 142 destinations. So we've seen that we've had an increase in pupils, an increase in destinations, and that's related to an increase in need. Now, in the last year, there's been a sort of slowdown in growth. And one of our, I talked about a number of strategies. What we're trying to do is, first of all, ensure that all children have access to inclusive education in mainstream where possible, obviously in our special schools, and we have good special schools where that's appropriate. And we are looking to implement new resource bases in our mainstream schools, so that actually, again, that support can be offered quickly to children and young people in a timely way, so as their needs are identified, and it can avoid those needs escalating. We are duty bound to provide travel care for those children and young people who need it, and indeed some young adults. So adult legislation also requires that that some young people are supported into their destinations. We conducted an exercise across West London last summer, and we benchmarked a whole range of performance indicators, including the number of children getting support, and that's roughly about 1/3 of our children who have got an EHCP plan get support, and that's compares very well. Equally, we looked at sort of the volume, we looked at the cost analysis, we looked at the number of young children who travel solo. And some children do that because their needs are such that they need that one-to-one attention, or there's just not enough children going to a similar destination. So we've also previously looked at the cost of our provider. 2 years ago, Sarah's team secured a new provision at PACE when we had provider failure. There are not a lot of people in this particular sector, but we have been able to manage our costs and manage them well and deliver a good quality service. So yes, the short answer is we do benchmark ourselves. We are confident that we offer a good value service at an optimal cost, that we are meeting the needs where they are, where young people are entitled to and will benefit from that. We also encourage, where appropriate, young adults to travel by themselves where that enhances their life experience. We certainly don't want to create dependency, but we do need to acknowledge the needs of our children and young people. The service is managed by Sarah, and I don't know whether I've left anything out, Sarah. Stealing her thunder again, sorry.
Yeah, just to say, obviously, it's an incredibly well-managed service. And after the team had to jump in, after our previous provider went bust, with about 3 weeks to go before the beginning of term, the team came in to work incredibly hard to make sure we had a good provider. I mean, like many major council services, there are only 2 providers in this space now. So there's a real limit to what's provided. But the team have worked really tirelessly to make sure that we are getting the best value for money that we can, looking at route optimization, looking at different vision at different points, looking at dialing up or down transport support as much as possible. So it's a conversation that we have a lot because we know it's an expensive thing. But ultimately, the most important thing is getting those young people to school in a way that's safe.
Thank you so much, Councillor Sanderson and Ms. McLennan. Just a follow-up question there. Do we have a breakdown of how many of these young individuals are having to travel outside the borough?
Yes, we know all their destinations. We know those who are travelling outside. I have the figure in my head, but I don't have it in my head, but I'll get it in a moment. It'll come back. But yes, we monitor that, and we don't have excessive numbers of children travelling outside the borough. We do want to encourage children and young people to avail themselves of the educational opportunities that are here. We do know that our provision doesn't meet all needs, and that's why we've got a SEND school strategy, looking at where we've gaps and how we can meet them. And that's one of our key priorities for this year and going forward.
Thank you. That's fantastic. Thank you.
Yes, good point. Nadine, we'll bring you in now. Go for it.
My question is again connected to travel care and support. I mean, a few years ago, you had a very good offer of independent travel training. Where does that stand now? Because even my own son has benefited from independent travel training from the council. Do you still have that? Are there plans to offer independent travel training to students?
Thank you, Nandini. Yes, we do. There hasn't always been a great take-up of it, but we do offer it where it's appropriate. We find that some of the young people who've needed the transport are not appropriate to have the travel training, but it is an offer on offer. And we can certainly review it to make sure that it's accessible and people know about it, if that somehow hasn't been communicated.
It hasn't been communicated, so I think you really need to tell parents or tell people where the offer is. I think before the offer was at Wood Lane School, and it was an offer to all the pupils in the borough, and the schools used to work very closely with travel care and support service to offer it to eligible pupils. But now we are not aware of that service. So if there is one, we do need to know about it.
Thank you, Nandini. I think we need to come back to you on that. I think it is within the schools, but we need a bit more join up, and we'll certainly take that back with us.
That will be appreciated. Yeah.
Thank you. And sorry, Councillor, if I could just come back to your question. So in terms of out of borough, we know that about 21% of our children travel out of borough, and that compares to sort of mid-30s for other West London authorities.
Thank you very much. If I could just come back on the point about council tax and the council tax base. I think that the question sort of shows a bit of a misunderstanding of how council tax works. You might remember just last week, we had a council meeting where we voted on the council tax base, and then we voted separately on the council tax support scheme. The council tax support scheme doesn't erode the base. It's taking people off it once it's been set. But the reason why we exempt these groups from paying council tax is because they're in very difficult circumstances, and we think they're the least able to pay. You know, people like war widows, people like those on low incomes, those on disability benefits, care leavers, and now for the first time, in recognition of all the work that they do, foster carers. Now, exempting these people from council tax doesn't push up other people's council tax. You know, we have a 2.99% limit on how much we can increase council tax before we have to have a referendum. So that still applies to us. That's not higher because we're exempting these people. Other people aren't paying more as a result of this. This is us choosing to exempt the people who are struggling most because these are such difficult economic times.
Thank you very much. Did anyone want to come back on any of those points? Otherwise, I've got some on my own as well. I actually had a question around the sort of the settlement amount. It's obviously published very late with short, kind of notice every time to plan it, and we've seen even within the inflation rate unexpectedly going up that you have to kind of bolster in a certain amount of contingency or change. I wondered kind of how you do that, how you manage to build that into the budget and how you review it ongoing.
So just to sort of a bit of context really. So we have a sort of a net controllable budget of around about 200 million. And of that, around about a third is general grants. Council tax accounts for 40% and business rates accounts for about 32%. So the proportion that is actually government grants is a sort of not 100% of our net controllable budget, first point. Second point is that we obviously model the numbers, and we have kind of a range of options. And we also look to be informed by people like DLUC, who people like Society of London Treasurers, had a group of London finance directors keep in touch with. But you're right, there is an element of unpredictability about it, and as at the crunch point of mid-December, when we found out what the numbers were, there was a bit of a surprise in one of the grants which had been slashed, basically. So there is an element of, and then you have to go back, recast the numbers. You've got a bigger gap than you thought. So it is a bit of a precarious situation. And as I've mentioned, we've generally been in a world of 1-year settlements. So we can only really plan. We only got certainty of planning for that 12 months ahead. You know, we don't get multi-year settlements, which is really what the sector's been crying out for a long time. So there is an element of unpredictability about it, and we try to manage that as best we can. In terms of inflation and interest rates, clearly, again, that's looking at modelling, looking at Bank of England, looking at Office of Fiscal Responsibility, people like that, to actually model. But as my finance director is very keen in saying, no budget is ever perfect. There are always going to be estimates and modelling that are involved to actually mean that, you know, there could be things that you get wrong, and that's why we have things like contingencies to actually kind of just give us that cushion where perhaps we might need it.
Yeah, I think James is being very modest. It's incredibly difficult in order to forecast this stuff, right? And things like the rampant inflation we've had in recent years has made that all the harder. He's right that we use things like contingencies in order to try and manage that and mitigate that risk as much as we can, but it's very difficult. When we're planning for these things, when we're sort of guessing how much we're going to be given by central government, you know, it's usually a case of setting, you know, worst case scenarios, and the government usually manages to meet those. Just to elaborate a bit more on the chaotic way in which local government is funded. We found out on the 18th of December what our final figures are going to be through the local government financial settlement. The 18th of December. There's absolutely no reason why central government needs to leave it this late, right? That's just before, put into context, that's the last couple of days before Parliament went off for Christmas. We used to get these figures in November. It's now been pushed back and back, and it just means that this budget setting process is getting harder and harder. Again, James says we only get a 1-year settlement now. This is the 6th year in a row. The 6th year we've just been given a 1-year funding settlement. Now it's incredibly difficult for us to plan our 4-year budgets when we're only finding out just before Christmas that we're going to get, you know, 1 year's worth of funding, and then we're going to have to keep guessing again for the next few years. There's no reason at all why it needs to be this chaotic. It's just a case of mismanagement. Finally, the household support fund. You know, this is a major grant, you know, £2.8 million that we've spent on some of the most vulnerable during the cost of living crisis. We found out that we weren't going to get any of that from April onwards. We now hear that, oh, perhaps there'll be something in the budget. Perhaps there'll be some sort of compensation about dropping out in the budget. The problem is the budget doesn't come out until the 8th of March. Our budget will be set by then. We can't possibly plan for this sort of thing. We can't set budgets in with any real degree of certainty when we have such a chaotic system for funding local government. It doesn't need to be like this. It's not an ideological thing. It's not a case of small states or big states or anything like that. It's just a case of competence. And frankly, we've got a central government that's not competent when it comes to funding local government and doesn't seem to care.
Thank you, Fiery. And just to back that, I mean, what that means in real terms for our partners as well, we have a number of contracts with external partners that we work with, and that's incredibly hard to guarantee those contracts in the long term as well, because if we don't know how much money we're going to have coming through for different partnership working, it's very hard to give them security as well. So that means third sector, voluntary services really bear the brunt of financial incompetence from the government, when really a multi-year financial settlement would make so much more sense, and not coming immediately before Christmas. Thank you.
Yes, I can imagine my twofold response is I'm sure they've hemorrhaged votes in all local government finance teams and perhaps their families as well over Christmas. But it also is making me think about what you were saying, Hanson, earlier with the transport providers, and essentially with such, you know, statutory services, high risk service delivery in, you know, a market that's increasingly from, you know, national level not underinvested for so long. It is actually making the service provision from those we contract from not necessarily within the contractors, low quality, but it is overall a less competitive landscape as people pull away like they're different from the care sector. And that is something that is now happening across a number of departments. You literally cannot get a competitive enough, tender often, or having to really work your contracts that you've got with different providers as the market understandably kind of steps back from going near things with such variability and unpredictability.
Absolutely, and it's not just us that's seeing it. So I mean, I sit in an audit committee because I don't have a life, and one of the things that I think we only had 2 companies pitch to audit. Is that right? Because they only had 2 companies in the whole of the country had the capability to audit councils, and that is it's a worrying trend. And so I think you're right. We're seeing that kind of lack of diversity of candidates coming through, which is concerning.
Yeah, that is a real worry. I actually, as a secondary question, I wondered about, so if you could take us maybe a bit into the, layman's tuning in, into the back office of how this works, the funding that you get from central government, the different kinds of grants, how much flexibility or agency do you have over spending those?
Yeah, I think that this is another trend we're seeing in terms of local government funding, in that more and more of the grants that we get from central government are ring-fenced for more and more specific purposes, right? So whereas it used to be the case you'd get a pot of money, and as the problems are different in different parts of the country, different councils would have more leeway in terms of how they decided to spend that money, right? The problems we have here in Hammersmith and Fulham will be very different to the problems they have in the northeast of England and Scotland and Wales, wherever, whereas now, as well as grants reducing in volume, we're seeing more and more strings attached to funding, constraints on how it can be spent, and it's not a particularly welcome trend, but it is one that we're seeing growing over the years.
Noted, thank you. I'm just going to make sure I'm not hogging the mic. Nandini, you've got your hand up. Thank goodness you're giving people respite from me asking questions.
I was just wondering, family hubs are a result of the Department of Education's investment, and they
I missed the first half of that, Nandini. It might just have been me. I heard family hubs, but then
family hubs are a result of the Department of Education's investment into local authorities. Is this an ongoing investment? Like, would you get an investment from the DFE every year, or once it's set up, it's done, and then you have to plow in money into family hubs?
Thanks for the question, Nandini. Essentially, the department was successful in bidding for over £1 million of funding to put family hubs in place. So there has been DFE investment in sort of organising and establishing the family hubs. The investment that we see in the budget papers is in total 320,000 recurring investment from the council to sustain that model and to allow it to develop over the medium term. So some initial investment through grants that we were successful in obtaining, but the core investment will be there on an ongoing basis.
Can I ask one more question?
Please do.
I mean, you said the impact of the budget, there will be an impact on your partners, which is the third sector organizations. This year, I think we are getting, all the third sector organizations have to bid for the third sector investment funds. So will there be a reduction in the third sector investment funds on offer?
Did you hear that one? Yeah.
Did you get the question?
I think, Nandini, slightly tangential to people we have in the room being able to answer in detail potentially, but we will note your question and get you a fuller response from someone in the council, if that's okay. It's just slightly on the periphery of
Okay, that's
committee.
Fine.
Is that okay?
That's fine. Sorry about
Great.
that.
Thank you very much.
I'll take that away.
Great, thank you. Thanks, James. Any other questions from left or right? And otherwise I had a kind of rounding up kind of question on things to hone in on. So I wanted to sort of ask, we've just touched on it's very hard, financially to look at the next year, but maybe from the team here, what the priorities are for next year, and feel free to highlight anything, particularly what your things you're proud of, worries. You can maybe touch on some of the things you've mentioned to varying degrees of detail, Jackie, on offer for care leavers, or some of the openings, the highlights of next year, and that will be big spend and you anticipate growing spend.
Thank you. We did put it up in the PowerPoint, but we probably moved on from that. So we want to continue, of course, our sort of overall trajectory of, being caring, compassionate, being ambitious, aspirational. And one of the things that's happened over previous years, and Councillor Saunderson referred to, or over the past year, is our willingness to step up into to lead both sub-regionally. So we're leading on a number of sub-regional projects, including Amina and her team, and Sarah leading on a fostering recruitment and retention hub, again through a very successful bid to DFE, is it DFE? And I'm really proud that we're leading on behalf of the 8 London boroughs there. And then again, that's part of the strategy to provide enhanced local high quality placements where children and young people can stay close to their communities. Councillor talked about the industrial strategy, and that's very much again working with businesses, and that sort of exemplifies the way we're working differently with different partners, not just traditional partners, but actually thinking out of the box, and with under the aegis of the leader and Councillor Saunderson, there've been lots of different workshops with our schools and our business partners, looking at how we can enhance STEM provision in schools and STEM opportunities for children and young people. We're leading on, so you've heard about local improvements and enhanced offer to care experienced young people, but equally we are leading on Pan-London work and the Pan-London Care Leavers Compact to ensure that all care experienced young people, regardless of which authority they're in, benefit from a consistent offer, including a housing offer, education, employment, training, mentoring, and again, access to employment and business opportunities. I've talked about SEND and our children with special education needs and disabilities, and several times I've sort of referred to how we have invested in early prevention, such as our communication team, joint communication team, to ensure that there's an early access to speech and language therapies that isn't dependent on having education, health and care plans. And that's part of that whole early help piece, which is looking to support young people at the earliest opportunity, both in their lives, but also when issues have been identified. And in Children and Young People Services led by Amina, we've been working to support young carers. And I know, Nadia, you talked about households with carers. But one of the real step changes in the last year has been our support and engagement with young carers, and something we're really proud of. But equally, our early help services are working directly with children and families, especially those on the edge of care or on the edge of protection, but equally working in partnerships with schools. Attendance, as I've said before, is a national, it is a local issue. We are seeing a significant increase in persistence, absenteeism, both at primary and secondary school levels. And that behoves us then to work again in partnership to address that, because there are a whole range of complex drivers underpinning that. We continue to work closely with our schools to make sure that they're financially viable. We're certainly experiencing difficulties there. There's equally, our schools are experiencing some recruitment and retention issues. as do we in Children's Services, the Council of Children's Services. And I talked earlier about our workforce, and we really are investing in our workforce and investing in support to help our young workforce, our inexperienced workforce, as well as those longer term practitioners, to constantly evolve their practice, to develop confidence, and also the ability to grow beyond some of the really challenging circumstances that they face in the degree of need when there are families in great uncertainty and distress. So I don't know whether there are any other major ones that I've forgotten, but we're also doing sort of the national programs as well as London programs, sub-regional programs, and I think it's really positive that we feel confident enough to be able to reach out and take leadership roles in those, while firmly having our hearts and feet rooted in Hammersmith and Fulham, to make sure that the children, young people here are a priority. But we do believe that by listening, learning, sharing, that we can be inspired and in turn inspire from the good practice. And there are a number of areas where our good practice has been raised by the DFE, who are very keen for us to share. So it's to continue that ambition, that trajectory, and to keep focused on outcomes for children, young people and their families. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Are there any final questions, comments, reflections from anyone in the room before I go to kind of wrap up? Not from you, Nandini. Although I have been very impressed throughout the evening. No one whisper about Jackie or Tony, because they will hear you from inside a square mile. It transpires. Incredible hearing. I haven't been able to hear any of it. Okay, I wanted to thank you both, actually both teams in the room. You've obviously got an excellent culture. So I think you both have done the basics brilliantly and got those right and secure, and you've been able to think big. And that's a very hard thing to couple when it's such kind of adverse financial times. I very much hope that in a year we are looking at a different kind of situation, but thank you for being resilient. I just wanted to check before we move to close that, Debbie, we had received the amends to the minutes from Nandini, either by email or, is that okay, Nandini? You sent those through. I'm seeing nodding from Debbie that she's received your changes, so we will incorporate those and reflect on them.
I haven't sent them. I'll send them after the meeting.
You haven't sent them yet, but you're sending them off, is that?
After the meeting.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Nandini. We'll make sure that we'll have an action to make sure we look at those. Thank you for spotting them. The sort of next date of, so the next date we'll be meeting on the 25th of March, so just before end of the financial year. So please note that, and thank you for coming in on a January evening again to everyone here in person and those joining us virtually. Thank you very much. Good night.